Waves and Abbey Road Studios have released the world's first proper, true vinyl emulation plugin. Abbey Road's been cutting discs since 1931, and those years of experience have really been encapsulated inside this piece of software. This is the true sound of vinyl cutting at Abbey Road. So the really amazing thing about this plugin is that it allows you to experiment with the vinyl sound in ways and situations that just wouldn't be practical in the real world due to time, cost effectiveness. So for example, you can use this plugin to apply the vinyl sound to individual elements of your recording, your multitrack. So strings, synths, bass, drums, vocals. On top of that, it allows you to experiment with different playback cartridges, different playback decks, and also the difference between what is sent to the factory and what comes back from the pressing factory, which is actually 3 to 4 generations down by the time they make up the stamper disc. The sound that's being captured with this plugin, the work that Waves have done is absolutely amazing. I mean, we did a lot of test recordings with various different types of music and different types of material. And I've A/B'd between the original recordings and what the plugin's doing. And it's like, it's so close. You can't really tell the difference. This is a really authentic plugin of the vinyl sound, which no one's done this before. Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
We started this project about 3 years ago now.
We certainly did.
Before we go into that, can you tell us when you started Abbey Road and how you got into cutting vinyl?
Okay, well, I started at Abbey Road 10 years ago, but I'd already been man and boy somewhere else, notably the Townhouse in Shepherd's Bush, which was Richard Branson's Virgin's facility, where I worked for 14 years, doing the same thing as I do here, really, but with different stuff. And probably a further 15 years before that in 3 different mastering rooms in London. So I have served my time.
What is the process of cutting vinyl?
Well, the process is really to get the master tape onto the disc with as fair a representation as you can, so that the record sounds as close as it can, if not better, to the master tape. Sometimes the limitation of the cutting equipment stops you doing that. Sometimes you have to further enhance what you're doing to get the master across at the same spectral value. But the way to explain it is that we listen to the master, the source file, check it for tonal balance, and then think about the transfer. We think about how loud we can transfer the master to the disc. We take into consideration the length of the program. Is the album side around 20 minutes? If it's longer, it presents a problem with groove width and also level of cut. So we consider all those things: the spacing, the volume, the type of music, and then process the signal to suit. And with any luck, we'll get it on the side, and off you go. It's like a record player in reverse, the actual process. It's shouting at it so much, 600-watt transistors shouting at the cutter head, getting the signal into the disc. That's probably the easiest way to explain it to the layman.
Lester, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
One of your many roles here at Abbey Road Studios is to look after the cutting rooms from a technical point of view. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us when you how you started Abbey Road and when you started Abbey Road? How did this come about?
I began my life at Abbey Road in January 1970, and we had 6 cutting rooms, 6 mastering rooms. You used to call them cutting rooms. One of the things I learned was the setting up of the lathe. Every morning we had to do tests on the lathe to check that it was in top running order.
So Abbey Road opened in 1931. I mean, since Abbey Road opened, we've been cutting to some degree, whether that's in wax, shellac, or later on vinyl. Do you think that process, is the actual physicality of what's happening, in cutting. Has that changed over the years, or is it pretty much the same as it's always been?
Well, cutting was entirely different in the early days. The gramophone company was formed in 1898. And in those days, everything was acoustic and recording down a horn and then cut straight to disc. When we turned electrical, and that's when EMI and Abbey Road started, we cut onto wax blanks at that time. The wax blanks were about 1.5, 1.75 in thickness, about 12, 14 inches in diameter. And they were kept warm in a warming cupboard, which was in the same cutting room. And when they were needed, they were taken out of the warming cupboard and ready for the cut to take place. The engineer was the number one person who would tell the conductor when to start, because he could only start when he had cut the first groove in the wax. And with a 4-second run-in, he would then put on a red light or buzz, and the orchestra would start playing. And that would carry on until the run out at the end of the groove. And that wax, by that time, was solidified and boxed up and sent to the factory for processing. That was the procedure right up to the 50s. When vinyl began, in possibly we think about 1952, we had to turn to different types of lathes that could run at 33 1/3, 45, 78 RPM. So early on, we had 10 cutting rooms with at least 13 lathes in, because not only were we recording from sometimes live music and speeches that were being recorded, but tape had come in 1948, and our master came from tape.
But the computer file has replaced the tape as the master of today, really. So you're now trying to get the ultrasonic and subsonic frequencies of new modern 24-bit files onto a system that was designed to run off 30 IPS and 15 IPS tape with a narrower bandwidth and frequency response.
Are there certain frequencies or certain sounds that just always cause you sort of things to look out for?
Yes, definitely. Things like vocal sibilance, stuff like muted trumpet, anything with a pure tone, really, either from a voice, if it can happen, or a musical instrument, a sustain, and high and low end, really. That's the trouble. You need to filter those and treat them as such without overdoing it, because then you're going away too far away from the master tape. You can't lose sight of the ball and say, I'll make it sound like this, because the master is the true representation.
Is there anything that's that has been unsalvageable, like you've had to go back to the engineer or producer and say, look, I can't cut this?
Yeah, lots of extremely high frequencies will trip the cut ahead. It just physically won't work.
When the master leaves here, the master you cut, what happens to it after that?
Well, it leaves here, you cut a separate lacquer for each side of the record. It's never cut like a finished pressing. Those lacquers are placed in a box which is sealed airtight and then transferred to the record factory. To just surmise this, the processing begins with a day-long process where they silver the disc, wash it first, check it for blemishes and finger marks and stuff, silver it, and then to make it conductive, and then grow a negative from it in a plating bath which is full of chemicals and an electric currents pass through it, a bit like a chrome bumper on a car, chrome plating, if you like. They'll then have they'll grow it to a negative form. This is no good because the grooves are going the other way round. They're imploded, so like a negative on a film. So they've then got to get back to a positive again to check it. So again, they grow from a negative to a positive, which they can take out of the bath, centre, and actually play to see if there's anything on it. They've got a very, very thin silver nickel copy, if you like, of the original master lacquer. Once they've, the QC, QC, I'll use that term lightly, has checked that there's something on it, they will then take the process further, towards the mother, master and the stamper, which is the same thing through again. But they keep the positive now as the master and disregard the lacquer. They can then throw the lacquer away because the positive is now the master, if you like. Having grown the pressings, they'll then put an injection moulding press. You'll have the record label, a blob of vinyl, 100 tons of pressure, there's your record, and so on, and so on, and so on. But back in the day when records were king, lots of units would need to be pressed. So once the stampers wore out, they would go back to the positive and grow more stampers. Once the positive wore out, they would then contact the cutting room or the record company and ask for a recut. If you had a major, if you're working on a major label that was going to sell millions, or had a projected million sales, you would cut several sets of lacquers to furnish different factories. So I can remember cutting 7 sets of Brothers in Arms Dire Straits on a Saturday, and my colleague went in on the Sunday and cut another 8. So we cut between us 15 sets of Brothers in Arms to furnish every factory in Europe for that record. And I believe that record sold about 15 million. So
it's quite a popular record.
Quite a popular record. One of many.
That sounds like quite a lot of, there's quite a lot going on in the factory there, from what you send the factory to what comes back. I mean, I got a chance during this project to do a direct comparison, compared to what we send or what we get back. And to my ears, it's almost as if what comes back from the factory just sort of smoothed everything off slightly.
Well, yes, because it's the factory involvement, it's the processing that changes the sound of the record from what leaves here. It's pure as the driven snow when we put it in the tin, in the lacquer box, but the processing, as I just explained, that adds the noise, the clicks, the bumps, the wow and flutter. That adds all the stuff, all the nasty stuff to records that people love. The analogue, the warmth. The warmth often is the factory smoothing all the top off, because the high end will give you a jagged sawtooth groove, which is almost impossible to replicate. So they will literally physically smooth those sawtooth shapes down, so they're easier to replicate, and then you lose top. Well, you lose top, so you gain low end. That's the warmth that you hear that everybody loves, but that's the top getting rolled off, in my book.
So the plugin gives you the option to turn the TG desk off and on, the sound characteristics of the TG desk. What part does the TG desk play in your day-to-day life?
Everything. It's our tonal balance changer. It enhances and takes away the frequencies that we do and don't want. So without the TG desk, you'd just be cutting straight from the source to the disc. So you have to have something in between to enable you to manipulate the sound, which is what the TG does in a nice old analogue way that everybody still loves, thankfully.
When CDs came along in the late 80s, 90s, our factory at Hayes, which had over 136 presses, closed down in the late 90s. And we closed some of our cutting rooms down, but foresight or something kept 3 rooms running. Now, classical people would like vinyls and they carried on cutting. The DJs and dance music liked using vinyls still late into the 1900s and 2000s. So it was beneficial to keep rooms running. And the fact that they have now, vinyl has made a big comeback, has been a bigger surprise to me as to anybody. It's quite amazing that I never predicted that 78 would come back in big force again. Never realised that. It's amazing.
Over the last few years, there's kind of been this reinterest in vinyl again. I mean, it's nowhere near the levels it was back in the king of vinyl days, 70s, 60s, what have you. But what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think this is?
I think that Record Store Day kicked it off. The whole, when Record Store came about, it was the independent record shops throughout Great Britain selling limited edition 7-inch records on a specific day. I think it's around the start of April. That ran for a couple of years. and kids that knew nothing about records knew about Record Store Day. But what really sells it is the fact that it's tangible and it's an event to play a record. You take it, you take it out the sleeve, you put it on the turntable, you physically put the arm on the disc and watch it go across. You can't do that with the iPod or your phone or whatever. It's an event. And I think people that have grown up in the digital generation where listening to the phone has been it, this has got them, it's just caught them, and they've become interested again. And then all of a sudden they have a record collection, which is something physical you can see. It's just not out there in the ether, not in the cloud. It's there, it's in your front room or your bedroom or whatever. That's kind of it, I think.